Imagine a scenario in which the United States launches a full-scale military intervention in Venezuela. The political system collapses, the presidential palace is overrun, and Nicolás Maduro must make the most critical decision of his life: where to flee, who will protect him. For a man who spent years positioning himself as the main symbol of anti-American resistance in Latin America, his choice of refuge would be a geopolitical event of global proportions. For more than a decade, Russia has been Venezuela's most powerful external supporter. Moscow has supplied military equipment, advisors, loans, and political backing at the United Nations. If Maduro had to flee, Russia would appear to be the safest haven. First, Russia is one of the few states that could openly defy Washington without fear of American retaliation. Hosting Maduro would be, for Moscow, a symbolic victory in the global contest against US influence. Second, Russia maintains deep intelligence ties with Venezuela. The Venezuelan armed forces have used Russian equipment, and Russian advisors are embedded in certain security structures. This makes coordination of an evacuation logistically easier. Third, Russia has a long history of hosting exiled leaders unwanted by the West. From Ukrainian and Georgian separatist leaders to Syrian officials, Moscow has shown willingness to accept politically sensitive figures. Fourth, Russia's geography is an advantage. It is far away from the Western Hemisphere, outside the reach of US law enforcement, and protected by a nuclear deterrent. But Russia also has important drawbacks. 1. Distance is a major obstacle. In a crisis situation, Maduro would need a secure escape route across the Atlantic or through third countries. US air dominance in the Caribbean would make a direct flight nearly impossible. 2. Russia is experiencing its own geopolitical and economic pressures, especially amid ongoing confrontations in Ukraine or elsewhere. Hosting Maduro might provide symbolic capital but also adds unnecessary complications. 3. Life in Russia might be extremely uncomfortable for Maduro. He does not speak Russian, has no cultural connections, and would be under constant security control by Moscow. Still, despite these disadvantages, Russia remains one of the strongest candidates. Turkey has cultivated relationships across ideological lines, from NATO to Russia, from Israel to Qatar, from Ukraine to China. Venezuela is no exception. Ankara and Caracas have strengthened ties over gold trade, finance, and political cooperation. First, Turkey has demonstrated its willingness to protect controversial leaders. Its record includes hosting exiled Muslim Brotherhood figures and political dissidents considered enemies by powerful states. Second, Turkey is geographically well-positioned. Maduro could theoretically escape through a chain of friendly or neutral countries and reach Turkey via Africa or the Middle East. Third, Ankara seeks to expand its influence in Latin America, and hosting Maduro might be seen as an opportunity to assert independence from US foreign policy. However, the disadvantages are equally important. 1. Turkey is still a NATO member. Hosting Maduro could provoke serious diplomatic tension with Washington at a time when Ankara needs economic cooperation with the West. 2. Turkey may not want to take on a refugee who brings no significant strategic benefits. Unlike Qatar's hosting of exiled political movements, Maduro offers little ideological or financial value to Ankara. 3. The Western Hemisphere is not Turkey's priority. Ankara might prefer to avoid getting involved in a crisis that is geographically distant and politically heavy. In short, Turkey is a possible option but not the most likely. Iran and Venezuela have built a strong partnership over the past 2 decades. Under both Hugo Chavez and Nicolás Maduro, Tehran was one of Caracas's key economic and political allies. They cooperated on fuel shipments, industrial projects, intelligence, and anti-US messaging. First, Iran is ideologically aligned. Both governments portray themselves as part of an anti-imperialist axis pushing back against US dominance. Second, Iran has already helped Venezuela survive sanctions by sending refined gasoline, technicians, and advisors. This makes Iran one of the few countries Maduro personally trusts. Third, hosting Maduro would be a powerful propaganda victory for Tehran, showing the world that another US target found protection under Iran's umbrella. Fourth, Iran is used to hosting foreign political figures, militias, and movements ranging from Iraqi politicians to Afghan factions. The disadvantages are significant. 1. Iran is geographically difficult to reach in an emergency. Maduro would need a complex escape operation involving multiple airspaces, many of which could be pressured by Washington. 2. Iran itself is under heavy sanctions and constant Western surveillance. Maduro's presence might escalate tensions, giving the US another justification for harder measures. 3. Unlike Russia, Iran does not have the same level of military protection or global reach to deter potential American pressure. 4. Cultural integration would be challenging for Maduro's family, who are accustomed to Latin American lifestyles. Thus, Iran is ideologically attractive, but logistically weak. Cuba is perhaps Maduro's closest ally. The Cuban intelligence service has permeated the Venezuelan state for years, helping Maduro manage internal dissent. Havana sees Caracas as its economic lifeline, receiving subsidized oil and political support. First, Cuba is geographically close, just a few hundred kilometers from Venezuela. It is the easiest country to reach during a collapse. Second, Cuba has hosted exiled leaders and revolutionaries for decades. Political asylum is a routine part of Havana's geopolitics. Third, Maduro has strong ideological ties to the Cuban regime. He was politically shaped by the legacy of Castro's revolution. Fourth, Cuba is already deeply invested in Maduro's survival. His fall would be a disaster for the Cuban economy. Therefore, Havana has a strong incentive to protect him. Yet Cuba also brings risks. 1. Its proximity to the US could make it vulnerable. Washington may not invade Cuba, but it could impose severe pressure, political, economic, or even covert operations. 2. Cuba's economy is collapsing. Hosting Maduro and his entourage would impose added burdens. 3. Havana must calculate whether keeping Maduro is worth the potential diplomatic crisis it could cause with future US administrations. Despite these challenges, Cuba remains one of the easiest and most realistic options. Apart from the four main candidates, a few secondary options exist. Lukashenko and Maduro share close ties and anti-Western rhetoric. Belarus is heavily aligned with Russia and could host him with Moscow's approval. North Korea is ideologically compatible, but culturally alien, economically devastated, and highly impractical. Algeria or Eritrea are type of anti-Western to varying degrees, but neither offers sufficient protection or strategic value. In the end, if a US intervention shattered the Venezuelan state and forced Nicolás Maduro to flee, his escape would almost certainly follow a path shaped by urgency rather than ideology. The most realistic scenario is that Maduro would first seek immediate protection in the country that is physically closest, politically aligned, and already deeply intertwined with his intelligence and security networks, Cuba. Havana has been the backbone of the Venezuelan regime for years, and its proximity makes it the only destination Maduro could realistically reach in the chaotic early hours of a collapse. Yet Cuba might not be his permanent refuge. Once safely outside Venezuelan territory and protected from capture, Maduro would likely negotiate a longer-term political asylum with Russia, the only major power capable of shielding him indefinitely from international pressure.